I think that even the person that's being hostile toward them, I want to love them towards Christ, no matter if they're a friend, an enemy, or whatever.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Follow-Up, where we recap this week's sermon so you can grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. I'm here with Pastor Jeffs. We're here with Pastor Jeff Pittman and
Jeff
Pastor
Squared.
Jeff Welcome, guys. Jeff Squared. That's usually how we like to do it around here.
Yeah.
We're diving into the last part of Romans 12, Love in Action. And Jeff Flutter, you started off your sermon with this study on toxic masculinity from a sociologist. Can you sum it up a little bit and share what surprised you most about it?
Yeah, so it was this guy named Brad Wilcox back in 2017. He was kind of, one of the cultural narratives, and so I was sharing for those that weren't at Bellevue, was just this idea that I think toxic masculinity is like a topic in our culture that essentially, I think there's a lot of blame shifting going on, especially towards like conservative Christian values, that like those types of environments create toxic masculinity. Like they create oppressive environments for women and children. And it's kind of just this idea of like, oh, we need to be pressing away from those types of situations. And Brad Wilcox, who's a believer, he did a sociological study and back in 2017 where he was just like, hey, is this really true? Like, and because fair enough, if it is, then we need to be aware that we're creating these environments. And so what he did is he actually separated into three groups. He had actively involved Christian men. He had nominal Christian men, which was just like Christians who just profess Christ, but they don't really attend church. They don't participate in their faith in any way, shape, or form. And then there were secular men who were non-believers in it. And so just kind of seeing, hey, are they happy in their marriages? Are the women happy? Are the children happy? Are they attentive with their kids? Do they yell at their kids? Do they abuse? Like, do they cheat on their wives? All those factors. And so actually the cool thing was that actively involved Christian men were actually the least likely to divorce or cheat on their wives or abuse their kids. Like they were the kindest, most actively involved in their families' lives. Their wives were thriving. Their kids were thriving. It was just kind of like, wow, this is cool. Like you don't need to study to validate biblical Christianity, but it's kind of cool. We were like, wow, look, like God actually knows what he's doing, you know? And so they created these environments where these families were thriving. And then when you look at the other categories, the second least likely was actually the non-believers. They were second place in terms of the environments that that their kids were in. And then after that was nominal Christians. Nominal Christians were the worst category. They were more likely to abuse, more likely to cheat on their wives, more likely to be yelling at their children and divorcing and experiencing marital instability. And so for our text of being like, what is the mark of a true Christian? It was just interesting that you had these people saying, yeah, I'm a Christian, but then like they don't participate in their faith in any way, shape, or form, but they take, essentially what they said is they take the Christian values and they use it for power and control. And so it does become oppression because they're not attaching themselves to Jesus. They're not trying to love like Jesus. There's no sacrificial element of it. It's just, yeah, I like that idea and I'm going to use it for my personal gain. And so, which is way against our text today. Everything about our text is loving sacrifice and pouring out like Jesus. I mean, literally modeling Jesus. So that's kind of what was, I guess the surprising part. That's just, it's cool. We don't need studies for that, but it's cool when the world's like, oh, hey, actually, like these families and women and children, they're actually thriving. So, so that's what was just really, really cool to study.
Definitely like you were saying, it was definitely the opposite of what we talked about. So leading into the first part that both of you guys really nailed was like, love must be sincere. Is that first part in Romans 12:9? Mm-hmm. Love must be sincere. So how do I know whether or not my love is sincere or insincere?
That's a good question. I think for ourselves, I think that we're probably the best next to Jesus himself, be able to look at our hearts, right, to see really what we're at. And I think that there's probably a joy that comes with being sincere. Like you want to do this, even if it's hard to love this way, but I want to be caring for somebody else. I think plenty of us, especially if you're adults and you're kind of be socially adjusted, you put on a front, you put on a face, you know you're supposed to be kind, you know you're supposed to do these things. You do it because that's what society kind of requires from you. And actually is a good thing to be doing. Even if you aren't feeling it, you're doing something, you're being nice to someone. Mm-hmm. But that isn't necessarily being sincere. That's like not being sincere talks about being like, it's coming from my heart. I want to do these things. So I think there's a motive, like that you want to, out of a love for them, out of a joy of your heart, to serve someone, even if it means that you give up something, or you're sacrificing something, or you're giving of yourself for it. So I think there's probably a joy or interest in doing it. It's probably a good mark if you're being sincere to love someone, as opposed to just doing out of obligation or because you're supposed to.
Yeah, and I think that the beauty of this passage is we don't have to wonder, because Paul answers this question, I think, throughout the rest of the text, which is, it looks like all these things, clinging to what is good, hating what is evil, honoring one another above yourselves. Like, he's literally fleshing out. It's like, hey, just in case you're wondering, what does it look like to love? Because Jesus is going to highlight that as you love God and then you love your neighbor. What does that mean? What does that actually look like? And so in many ways it means we talk about the image of God in terms of what we're made into, like as a reality, but it means to actually image him to other people, like that we would be that Jesus with skin on to those we interact with. And so modeling a lot of his ministry. And so I think that that's the part where it may not look like the culture, because we're imaging Jesus's love. We're not imaging just love as just like this concept, because I think that's not very loving. Well, it's like, what do you mean by loving? Because we define what a thriving human being is differently than maybe the person, on the street with a different worldview or religion or philosophy. It's tied to Jesus. It's tied to our relationship with the Lord. And so that's why it starts with that, even holding fast to what is good and hating what is evil. Which I think that the culture would say, that's not very loving, to hate what's evil. Like, I think that's one of the narratives of our day is no, you should just affirm and accept me for what I'm doing and what I'm choosing. That's the most loving, sincere thing you can do. And it's like, what if it's leading to your death and destruction? What then? Is it loving for me to go, yeah, just run towards that cliff? Just like take a nosedive off it, and I will make you feel really good about your decisions every step of the way. So,
yeah, along those same lines, Jeff Letter, you had talked about how, and this was a moment where I was like, yes, okay, here we go. As it's so difficult sometimes that the most loving thing to do may be perceived as being unkind. Can you kind of share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I deal with this in a lot of like family type situations where you're holding someone accountable to sinful realities. There's been especially a number of like abusive situations where you're having to do what it just feels heavy, which sometimes means, hey, I can't follow you. I can't join you in your foolishness. And so I guess the buzzword of the day is boundaries, type of day, which is really a boundary between like wisdom and foolishness, not between people. And so I think the loving thing to do is, I can't join you in the foolishness that you're doing. And sometimes that's coming at me, like you're being harsh and hostile towards me. And I'm going to have to walk away from this moment. And that might not feel loving to you in this moment, but what's going to come out of me and the direction this is going to go, it's not going to go in a God glorifying way. And so I've got to do the really hard thing. And maybe I need to step away from this interaction. And maybe if this continues, I may have to step away from this relationship for a season until this can start to model something like more God glorifying, God honoring. And I'm going to love you the best of my ability, but I'm not going to necessarily put me in a situation where you're continuing to sin against me repeatedly. And that in and of itself is not only like honoring the dignity, worth, and value of you as an image bearer, but also going, hey, the most loving thing for me to do to you is to not let you continue to sin against me in that way. And I think that's the hard part too, because it'll feel like, oh, you're being judgmental. It's like, no, like this isn't even loving for me to affirm you in the way that we're interacting in this space. And so, and just kind of like, can we step into something more wise? But yeah.
With that specifically, I think the reason why I got a little like, okay, here we go, Jeff. Like, okay, I was snapping my fingers while I was listening to it. Like, keep preaching. Because I'm in a situation in my life where I'm putting up the wall between foolishness and wisdom, and it's not being received as loving. So then in my internal, is this selfish? Like, am I actually making a selfish decision because I'm not loving the person the way that they need to be loved? Mm-hmm. So
And is that
Help me with that, guys.
Yeah. Do you want to speak into that?
I don't know if I want to speak into that. But I think you articulated a good spot because you're trying to say how you can love that person specifically. And loving someone is not defined by how they want to be loved, right? Not by like that isn't a determining factor. It's really how does God want us to love them, right? And so I think there's a bit of a probably a I don't know, balance is the right word, or a subjectivity maybe to like what that looks like, because especially when you like the wisdom and boundary piece, because that can differ between different people, right? I mean, some people maybe can that line can change, but you never want to. You want to make sure you are in a good spot, or that you're honoring God in the way your life is. So you want to make sure you don't step over that boundary there. But but I think the biggest part is just because loving isn't being loving to someone isn't defined by them. Like they don't do that. God defines what loving is. And I think being truthful to them is helpful. I think to balance it out with harmony, like pick your battles maybe to an extent, because it talks about being living in harmony and bringing harmony to situations. So I don't think it's the wisest thing to like bring out every sin you see someone in someone's life every time you see them. But that how do you navigate that without this connection to God and the Holy Spirit working through you to tell you when to step into this and to address this issue. And one time just let it go for a bit. You don't have to address every issue you see in someone, because that'd be taxing.
Yeah, and I think that's good, because I think that it could be. Is this about my preferences, or is this about like you said, the God-centeredness of it all? Is this God's goals? Is that the thing that's driving this, of like he's defining what's good and what's evil? He's defining what's loving and what's not, versus, I just don't like the way, this isn't a, we have like these like positive spaces, or like these safe spaces they have in like colleges and stuff. It's like, it's not necessarily you hurt my feelings. It's like, no, there's actually sin, that's involved in this. And we're going to God's word as the standard, who actually determines what those things are. And so if I can point back to say, no, like that's actually wrong. Like God wouldn't ask us to treat each other in harsh ways or speak to each other in those ways. Then I can point towards a standard beyond myself. And it's not just my standard versus your standards, us going, hey, we're under the banner of Jesus. And that's if you're dealing with a believer. Like if it's a non-believer, then it's like, I want to love you towards Jesus, and I'm not necessarily gonna expect Christian behavior back from you, but I'm still gonna be wise in how I interact with you. And so I think that there's even a difference, and the text gets in that a little bit, like as it goes on. It's not just the church, but it's also getting into like how we treat enemies and non-believers as well.
Absolutely. Leading us into our last question is then, what does it look like for us to show mercy to our enemies?
I don't know if we answer that question or not. But I think in the scripture, I was changed over. I think as I wrestle with this passages, I think there's a call to like love believers, love the church, to love people who are maybe not enemies, but maybe hostile to you, or not a believer, but not really like attacking you. And then there's like love your enemies, like care for your enemies, and in that spectrum of things. I can see how I can envision myself before I became a believer, loving my family. Okay, I can see myself doing that. Maybe not in the most Christ-like way, but I can see myself getting there. Being in harmony kind of with people who are not really attacking me. Sure, that call of Jesus to like love your enemies and to care for them. I don't know how anyone does that outside of Jesus. Like I don't see how you like. There's no way I can get there. There's no way I can even fathom if someone's actively attacking me, whether it be obviously physically or spiritually or emotionally or whatever it might be. They are, I can't get there without Jesus. So I think that first, to show mercy to somebody that's gotta be through God working through you. There's no way to do it otherwise. I don't have it within myself. I don't think most people, anyone really does otherwise. I think also another way to do that is you have to fight in a different way than the world fights. And so, when you fight back, or you maybe push back or protect yourself, you don't just become like this rag doll pushed around, right? So you stand up for yourself in the middle of that. Doesn't mean loving your enemies means that you just kind of get whipped around, but it means you don't have to fight back on the dirty tricks that the world does, right? And I think that people, when they're being in the world, feel like they're being attacked, They disparage, they attack equally. They are not honoring to people. And so you can fight back and you can have mercy for enemies and love them without going to middle school playground type ways of doing that. And unfortunately, the world has plenty of examples of that. Right. Plenty of that, namely politics, but a lot of different areas as well. That you just don't have to fight the same way. And so I think that should that should be the way that we stand out. That we can disagree, we can hold ourselves strong when we're being attacked, but we want to fight on their terms, under their rules, which I think is the way to do it. The only way you do that is through the power of God and the Holy Spirit working through you, because I don't have that within me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, mercy is kind of the relieving, not giving someone the consequences they deserve. And I think that part of that, just like you were hitting on there, is recognizing that everybody you interact with is made in the image of God. And so they have inherent dignity and worth and value for that sheer reality. And so if they're coming at me, I have the ability in that moment to not treat them maybe the way that I would say they deserve in that instance. And so modeling, I think, Jesus again in those interchanges. And so I use the example of David and Saul. I don't think anybody would have blamed David had he, it was 1 Samuel 24. If he would have just killed Saul in the cave and just taken over, God said he was going to be king, he was going to head that direction. But he knew that that wasn't going to justify an evil act, even though Saul technically deserved it in that instance. And I think that if we start to actually, the decisions that we're making are more about how can I draw this person to know Jesus deeper, even if they are an unbeliever or maybe they are a believer, what does it look like to act in accordance with that? And so I think that even the person that's being hostile toward them, I want to love them towards Christ, no matter if they're a friend, an enemy, or whatever. And so that allows me to possibly have some compassion that maybe my knee-jerk reaction wouldn't, propel towards. But there's an opportunity there that if I'm thinking, man, I want to love this person towards Jesus, I want them to get closer to Christ through my interaction. And I'm not saying, this is imperfect. I'm with you. That's not easy, especially when you got someone having vitriol towards you, or a lot of our spaces we're online, we're typing, these things against each other, and then which removes all the nonverbal communication. So you're interpreting it in probably the worst possible way too. Sure. I need to recognize that every person I'm interacting with is an image bearer that has the potential to have a relationship with Jesus, and maybe they do, which then that means that's my brother or sister. We're family. And so what does it mean to honor them, in that instance? And so I think all those questions are going through the grid, and that's only by the power of the Spirit that we can even tap into that and then love them beyond what they deserve, or what we all deserve, really. Yeah. So
thank you guys for joining us for this week's episode of The Follow-Up. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss out on an episode. We will see you guys next week as we dive into Romans chapter 13.